Batman for at least the first sort of 30 or 40 minutes of the programme. I'm a mere sidekick. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, joins us for the first time in a while. Do you know why that is? Have you been fighting shy? Have you been hiding from scrutiny?
If only. It's trying to get a costume as good as yours. Bear in mind that I'm Batman and you're Robin. It's great to be back and looking forward to speaking to Londoners and those across the country who may want to ring in and speak to Sadiq.
There is a heck of a lot going on. I don't think you need to be Nostradamus to predict that you're going to be answering quite a lot of questions about you, Les. But we'll begin, if we may. I don't know what you can say about it, but this footage that's emerged from the school in Ashford in Surrey of the young black girl being battered by a number of people with the apparent encouragement of an adult and nothing being done by the teachers. Can we just talk briefly about that side of it? Well, I mean, the school safeguarding side of it.
Well, firstly, I've spoken to a number of black people yesterday who were traumatised and triggered by what they saw on social media with this young girl.
It's hideous. It really is.
I wouldn't encourage anybody who's not seen it to watch it. It really is horrible to watch. What's clear though, is that there were bystanders. A, not intervening to stop it. B, apparently encouraging the beating up of this one child by a number of other children, with adults apparently encouraging the behaviour, literally outside the school. It begs all sorts of questions about safeguarding, about duty of care and so forth. And my understanding is Janet Davey, MP for Lewisham, not in the area where the attack took place, is raising this with both the Home Secretary and the Education Secretary, because there are concerns about what sort of training the school has, why they didn't get involved, why they didn't interfere, why they didn't stop this. And I'm pleased the police are now involved as well.
And I suppose all the rest of us can do is wait and hope that the wheels of justice move quickly, and that the broader questions are answered by the school.
Here's the point made to me yesterday by Dawn Butler, MP, was imagine how many children around our country are suffering a similar experience and it's not being recorded on a mobile phone and seen by others. And that's why it's really important that the Home Secretary and Health Secretary look into this issue and we find out what happened in this particular school and get the reassurance this isn't happening elsewhere across the country.
Indeed, and we'll be keeping you up to date with any developments on that story on LBC. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. To the phones.
OK, the first caller, good morning, is from Woolwich, and it's Richard. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Good morning. Sir, I voted for you. I'm a great supporter for you. I'm going to talk about ULEZ. I think it's a very unfair tax against working people and the poor. Did you know, for example, it now costs almost 40% more, these sort of second-hand cars, which are ULEZ compliant, they're now 40% more than they were a year ago. This is hitting working people. And my question to you is there anything that will stop you doing this madness?
Well, Richard, thanks for your call and thanks for raising your issues. So let me first explain why we're expanding the ULEZ. Toxic air is a matter of life and death. In our city, every year, there are 4,000 premature deaths directly linked to the toxic air. There are children with stunted lungs forever because of the toxic air, and adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma to cancer, dementia to heart disease, directly linked to toxic air. So we now have the evidence, it's unarguable, the link between toxic air and the health crisis we face. So the response is, do we do something about it? Or is the response, we don't do anything about it? And I'm in the former camp, doing something about it. And we've published some evidence today, Richard, which shows unequivocally and unarguably, Imperial College have peer-reviewed this, that the ultra-low emission zone in central London and inner London, where we currently have it, has been a huge success. 46% reduction in nitrogen dioxide in central London, 21% reduction in inner London. So 4 million Londoners are now breathing cleaner air. But there are 5 million Londoners in outer London who still aren't breathing cleaner. For me, it's a right, not a privilege. So we are this August, Richard, going to be expanding the ULEZ. But what we're also doing is, I announced 2 weeks ago, the biggest scrappage scheme ever seen in this country, £110 million to support the people you talked about, the sole trader, the small businesses. We'll also be helping low-income families, disabled people and charities. And so I'd encourage you to go to the TfL webpage and see if you're eligible for the scrappage scheme.
Can we dig into that now? Can we pretend I have a vehicle that is not compliant, that I need it to do my work? What help? And I can't afford the prices that Richard has just referred to because the used car market has gone absolutely bananas for a variety of reasons, not least the shortage of brand new cars. So what can I do? Here's my van. What happens next?
So the amount of money you receive from us can be anything from £2,000 if it's a car or a motorcycle up to £9,500.
Is it means tested in any way, or is it?
For a business, no. So if you're a business, if you're a sole trader, or if you're a small business employing less than 10 people, it's not means tested. If you're disabled, it's not means tested. If you're in receiving non-means tested benefits, you're eligible. And in fact, the numbers of people eligible are larger than the numbers of people who have a blue badge in London. If you're a family, it is based upon your income. I spoke to somebody this morning who was telling me somebody on £59,000 is eligible for the scrappage scheme. So I don't want your listeners to think, our listeners
Do you know what the ceiling is? Do you know what the threshold is for not being eligible for any help?
It depends if you're a family, a business, a sole trader.
Yeah, but if you're a family, if you're just a normal...
So there are some benefits that passport you onto the scheme, and so it depends if you're receiving universal credit, the number of children and so forth. But I'd encourage your listeners to go to the TfL webpage. You can even, if you want to speak to a human being, ring up the contact centre and speak to a human being who'll go through eligibility.
We'll be speaking, no doubt, to some more human beings about this. I think the short answer to your question then, Richard, about is there anything at all that would make you change your mind about what you described as this madness, the short answer was no, I think. How do you respond to that?
Well, yeah, I'm hearing that, and I've written to the office, and I've got the standard replies back. So I just anticipated that response. Yes, toxic air, but you know what? This is a toxic policy. I'm going marching tomorrow in Bromley against this. And one thing,
your major bone of contention is the cost to the people who can least afford it. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're not in any way reassured by what you heard. Have you about this scrappage scheme?
No, not at all, because you've got to rethink this. I'm not against the idea in principle. What I'm against is that working people are paying for it. That's the point, and that's the point that's not being answered.
Richard, let me deal with it, Richard, head on. These same points were made in 2017 when I first announced the policy in central London. We had this policy. The same points were made, Richard, with respect. The same points were made when I expanded the policy to inner London, up to the north and south circular. And the same points have been made now, James. Look, people who were against it now want me to delay it. And I was a member of Parliament, Richard, in the 2006 onwards, 2005 onwards. And the same arguments were made when we were talking about banning smoking in public places. The pubs are going to close down if people can't smoke there. The restaurants will close down. Working men's clubs will close down. The live music venues will close down, and so forth. And, I think health crisis is one we can't avoid. 4,000 premature deaths a year is one we can't avoid. The science we can't avoid. But the government's given me not a single penny of money, Richard. We've got now a scrappage scheme that totals more than £171 million. And I'm hoping as many people who may be affected because they've got a polluting vehicle take up the scrappage scheme.
Listen, hopefully we'll hear from... Sorry, Richard, you had one more point to make and I very uncharacteristically barged in and talked over you. What was it?
Well, it's just that more affluent people live in Zone 1 and 2. Yeah. And secondly, the scrappage scheme is not going to be a substitution for a single mother, working-class single mother, trying to get her 2 kids to school. You've got to rethink this. There must be a more sensible and more pragmatic way of doing this.
Well, let me respond to you. I've spoken to many mums and dads, in fact, who have kids, 2 kids, with a pollution vehicle, many in central London and in London, saying, thank God our kids are now not breathing in the poison they were in the past. Because if you're driving one of these polluting vehicles, you're breathing in poison. Let's not pretend if you're driving a vehicle, you're not breathing in the particulate matter, the NOx, the nitrogen dioxide. And by the way, if your kids are in the back seats, that may explain why they've got stunted lungs. It's those least likely to own a car, are least likely to be driving these vehicles, who are most likely to suffer the consequences. Half of our city don't own a car, Richard. They're breathing in the poison. With respect, you're churning out. And this is an issue of social justice as well as addressing the health crisis.
So, in a way, your critics and you are on different pitches, aren't you? In that they are describing accurately, in detail, the impact that it's going to have on them. And you are saying, well, actually, the bigger picture is much more important than these individual cases of suffering.
There are different people saying
Of
different
course there
things.
are. And your response is to say, in large part, to say, well, I heard all these criticisms last time round, and it's going great guns at the moment in the bits that we've already done. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to any criticisms about the next stage or phase.
That's not quite right. We're taking on board the concerns people have raised during both the consultation and the sort of concerns Richard has raised. That's why this scrappage scheme, James, is very different from previous scrappage schemes. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the concerns people raised was we can't retrofit our vehicle.
Yeah.
It costs about $5,000 to retrofit your vehicle. Well, we listened. Some would call it criticism. The new scheme does give you £5,000 towards a retrofit of your older van or minibus or whatever. We also listened to those people who said we need a longer exemption because we've got a vehicle that's older, but it enables us to carry a wheelchair. So the exemption and the grace period is a lot longer as well. So there are other examples where we've responded to criticism, the response in relation to the policy as announced.
What about people that work in the zone but live outside it? What help do they get?
Yeah, well, let me say a number of points in response to that. Firstly, I've been lobbying the government for 6 years.
Just before you go into detail, is the answer none whatsoever?
Well, no, you do.
Because I'm getting a lot of texts from people.
You do get support because we Londoners in road tax pay £500 million. We Londoners get none of that back. That money goes to people outside London in relation to improvements to your roads and so forth.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about. I'm talking about scrappage. I work in the zone, but I live outside it. If I lived in it, I could get some money for a new vehicle. If I live outside it,
let me be clear.
Yeah.
So if you live outside of London,
yeah.
And you bring in the poison into London,
you're bringing your tax money and your labour and your livelihood into London.
You should be working with me to lobby the government to have a national scrappage scheme, right? Right. And that's what we're lobbying the government.
So
to
you
have
couldn't extend it even if you wanted it to outside your electorate, effectively.
If you remember, I'd be criticised for doing so because I was elected by Londoners to look after Londoners' health, but also to support Londoners, and I'd be criticised for doing it outside London.
And when Martin Lewis suggests maybe just wait a bit, given the current economic circumstances?
Well, it's because we've listened to the concerns raised by not just Martin, but others as well about the cost of living crisis that we have. The huge scheme we've announced, £110 million. One of the things we've got to do clearly better is to inform Londoners of the eligibility, the criteria and the support available. But this is an issue where those poorest Londoners, least likely to own a car, suffer the worst consequences. But also the science is unarguable. But work with me to lobby the government for more support.
Okay, I suspect we'll be. There's another caller ready, but I suspect ULEZ is going to be very near the top of the agenda for most of our time together today.
Richard, thanks for your call. The second caller is from Lewisham, and it's Alex. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, James, and good morning, everyone. I'll start by saying, number one, thank you. Firstly, I'm fully in support of ULEZ. Where I live in Lewisham, I actually live in Grove Park. So I live in a borough, in a nutshell, that has been chopped in half by the current ULEZ. I'm a parent. I've got a 4-year-old son who has already had to start using an inhaler on occasion because of air pollution where we live. The road that I live on has regularly exceeded EU levels before you start talking about any lower ones. One thing I would say to you, Mr. Mayor, is this. The disappointing thing has been the messaging in that I feel like you've missed a trick with ULEZ. One of your predecessors who was mayor in London, Ken Livingstone, spent a lot of time when congestion charging was introduced talking about how you'd actually spend the revenue. I'm going to put more buses on the road, quote unquote, from the money from the congestion charge. I think it would be... The question for you I have is, number one, what are you going to do in my area? Because Grove Park has not seen any sort of investment in terms of active travel, the Healthy Streets agenda. And I know you don't have complete control of the roads, but you do have control of the South Circular, which runs through our neighbourhood, of which there has been no improvement from your mayor's transport strategy perspective. And then the other question I had is, what are you going to do to actually just improve the messaging about delivering the other things? So not just scrappage schemes, which, yes, my neighbours like, but, if you are going to improve public transport, can you talk a little bit more about what you're going to do in this bit of South East London? For full disclosure, I live about 150 yards from the Bromley border, although I pay my council tax to Lewisham.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for your call and also your challenge, as well as your kind words about the ULEZ. Let me respond in relation to your point about what improvements will there be, but also how is this money being spent. So every penny raised from the ULEZ, and by the way, after 2 years, we predict there will be no net money raised from the ULEZ because we hope it leads to people having compliant vehicles. So actually, it's a curve that goes downwards in relation to monies raised. We are going to be expanding buses in what's called Outer London by more than 2 million kilometres over the next year or two. That's the biggest expansion of buses in the history of our city, and I include the time when Ken was the mayor, because what I can't do is ask someone like you to leave your car at home, bearing in mind where you live, and not give you alternatives to your car. So at the same time as expanding buses by more than 2 million kilometres across our city over the next year or two, we've also so far increased fivefold the amount of safe cycling lanes, but we'll be expanding safe cycling, Alex. So if you're thinking about with your children jumping on a bike, you want to feel safe jumping on your bike. So we'll be expanding that even more, and also making our junctions safer to enable you to get on your bike and feel safe. And the other point I should also mention is in 2017, Alex, we had our first school street in Camden. We now have more than 500 across our city, because it's really important we work with councils to make our streets safer for children in particular walking with mum and dad or carer to school, by having the streets outside the schools safer. But I accept your challenge in relation to doing better comms in relation to the other benefits as a consequence of this policy. We're doing a huge amount. Clearly, I'm doing a bad job getting across all the huge amount we're doing.
Back to the question of people coming in from outside. James is a police officer, can't get a train into Croydon at the times he needs to. Shift workers will struggle with public transport particularly. I have to drive. There must be a way of introducing it that doesn't cost me a fortune. And also address a lot of people. I think I know the answer to this, but they'd rather hear it from you. A lot of people are pointing out Carl is one of them. It's not about cleaner air, it's about the money, because the non-ULEZ cars can still pollute the air, but they just pay for the privilege.
Well, no, I'm hoping the non-polluting cars get a less polluting car, right? Because I don't want to use...
And that is what the precedent has been set by the first zone,
that's the evidence.
Pretty clearly.
The evidence is, Carl, we went from
this
39...
is Imperial College, peer-reviewed by Imperial College London, undertaken by City Hall.
Yeah, but look at the numbers, James. When I announced this policy, only 39% of vehicles were complying. It's now north of 94%. So the evidence is it does lead to behavioural change. And I fail to accept the generalisation that everyone in central London and inner London is wealthy and can afford to change their vehicles. And if you live outside of London, you should be working with me to lobby the government for a national scrappage scheme, because you're breathing in this stuff.
Okay, we've heard that
wherever
already.
You are.
I understand that. This 4,000 figure, around 4,000 Londoners die prematurely every year due to toxic air. Can you just flesh that out a bit?
Yeah,
a lot of scepticism on my inbox.
We've had this week and last week, Conservatives in particular, questioning the science. And let me be quite clear about this and unresolute. As a former lawyer, but also as somebody who follows the evidence, it's really important that we have evidence that can stand up to scrutiny, because I know from the experience with Brexit, from the experience with the pandemic, from the experience with vaccine rollout, there are some people who spread misinformation and challenge experts. The Imperial College is, without any doubt, one of the finest institutions in the world, and the 4,000 premature deaths in London is an Imperial College piece of analysis done. Stands up to scrutiny. And I make this point, some people will challenge the evidence. Some people will say, and I've discussed in the past, people now don't like experts, particularly with acronyms. Well, I do like experts. When I've got a toothache, I don't go to YouTube, I go to my dentist.
You're lucky you can see one. Dr. Gary Fuller, the air pollution scientist from Imperial College London's Environmental Research Group, is one of the people you'd cite in this.
This guy is one of the leading experts in the world. We've got University College Hospital, Professor Jonathan Criggs, talking about the importance of us taking action here. The Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty's annual report last year was on, guess what topic? Air quality. And the link to premature deaths and the other issues caused by respiratory issues. Across our city, more than 500,000 people have ill health caused by the poor quality air. More than half of those live in outer London. The top 10 boroughs, I should say the worst 10 boroughs, with the most number of premature deaths are all in outer London.
And for a gardener in Teddington who's going to spend 20 grand on a new van, possibly, that's compliant, he's worried he will then move the goalposts again, and his new vehicle will be exempt, will fall under some future policy proposal.
Firstly, I can understand that concern.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why.
So can I.
Because 20 years ago, politicians were saying, move away from petrol and go to diesel because less carbon emissions, right? And lots of people, like the gardener in Teddington, listened and got a diesel. And now they're being told, actually, diesel is bad for the reasons I've cited. We will not be moving the goalposts in relation to, making it more stringent and stuff. What we have now is the Euro 6 and Euro 4 that we've already had. So just to reassure the gardener from Teddington, the policies we've announced will be the requirements in relation to cleaner vehicles. Basically, if it's petrol, more recent than 2005, and if it's diesel, more recent than 2015. But if in doubt, go to the TfL website, type in your number plate, and it'll tell you whether your vehicle is compliant or not. And actually, most people who are concerned actually have a compliant vehicle. The numbers are, 94% of vehicles are now compliant in central and in London. 85% compliant in outer London. And by the way, half of Londoners don't even own a car.
And that figure would have been partly natural, partly a sort of natural...
Well, here's the point. So the other point now my opponents are saying is, this would have happened anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So don't do the expansion because it'll happen anyway. Well, no. The reason why it happened was because of our policy. And so the idea that organically people in outer London will move in the speed of time we want them to move if there's no expansion is just not the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't have needed to have the policy, and there wouldn't have been the huge improvement there has been. And that's one of the points that the experts make in today's report being published. They want, in fact, other parts of the country, other parts of the world, to look at the evidence in London. There is no single policy that's led to the improvement in air in such a short period of time anywhere in the globe.
I'm not going to lie. I don't share the very, very strong feelings that people have about this issue. But I am conscious of wanting to properly represent them. So Gillian Purley says if it was really about the pollution issue, then you'd ban them outright, not let people to pay to drive in. If this strategy wasn't about making money, you would ban the polluting vehicles. I really want you to address all of these points. So what do you say to Jill?
You mean
why not just ban them completely to prove to Jill that it's not about revenue?
Because some people who've got a pollutant vehicle will do a cost-benefit analysis, and for them, they're better off paying the £12.50 than changing their vehicle. The principle is, Jill, the polluter pays. Right. So the idea is, if you're polluting, you pay. But also the flip side of that is, clean air shouldn't be a privilege; it should be a right, and everyone in London should be entitled to breathe clean air, whether you live in Camden, central London, or whether you live in Purley in outer London.
Another question, I think.
Okay, the next caller is from Hackney, and I'm hoping it's Sabrina. Good morning, Sabrina.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, it's Sabrina Ide from Hackney. Can I just start by saying, Sadiq, it's been amazing to see you take part in anti-harassment training yesterday and see you pledge millions in improving access to support for women and girls. My question is in regards to women's safety. So as a 22-year-old woman living in London, I am worried about going out alone, just being by myself at nighttime, and I feel like other women go through that as well. I'd often have to have family members or a friend that must be on the phone whilst I'm walking home. My question is every day we feel like we seem to hear about scary stories involving Met officers, so which are supposed to be protecting us. So Sadiq, what are you doing to reassure women and girls that they can trust the police?
Well, Sabrina, thanks for mentioning the training I did yesterday. I've done lots of training, but yesterday was organised by L'Oréal Paris and the Susan Lampley Trust in relation to being an active bystander. And can I just also say this, Sabrina, and I say this with embarrassment. As a man who thinks he's pretty aware, I think I've had blinkers on for a lot of my life in relation to the experience that people of your gender and your sex go through. I'll give you one example. In 2017, one of the best days in 2017, I went to a Killers concert in Hyde Park. I had a great day. And I discovered a few days later, somebody else went to that concert called Gina Martin. Same concert I went to, James. And Sabrina, you'll know this, but she had photographs. She had somebody taking photographs up her skirt, right? Now, I've obviously never experienced upskirting, as it's called, or I've never been touched up on the tube, or I've never had the sort of experience that other women have on a daily basis. And so we men and boys have got to be more aware of the daily experience of women and girls, but also we've got to recognise, rather than expecting women to change their behaviour, to impose a curfew on their lives so they get home before it's dark, so they wear certain items of clothing so they're not pestered, so they travel in groups so they're not picked upon by men. We've got to target the behaviour of the perpetrators, and that includes, from a young age, in my view, teaching boys about healthy relationships, about how to treat girls with respect, and so forth. And so one of the things, Sabrina, I'm trying to do is not put all the responsibility in the hands of the police. We've got to change the police, of course we do. The David Carrick case was a scandal, but the concern we have, and we now know there are other David Carricks as well. So there's a policing issue, but also I think, Sabrina, there's a societal issue. We've got to be starting at a young age in relation to education in primary schools and secondary schools. Our Have a Word campaign, Sabrina, has been really successful, viewed more than 60 million times. 90% of men change their behaviour after seeing this video. We've got to make sure, I think misogyny should be a hate crime. I think sexual harassment should be a criminal offence. And so places of work should be safe places. Public transport should be safe places. So I'm building allyship across our city and across our country to address this issue, Sabrina. But the heartbreaking thing is, across our country, every 3 days, a woman is killed at the hands of a man. And so that's why it's incredibly important we deal with this epidemic of violence against women.
And that bystander question, of course, pertinent to the story that we talked about at the very start of the programme today. The idea of people not doing anything, it is endemic, really, and pertinent to the territory that Sabrina describes. What do you learn at these training sessions? What do you do? Do you sit there with a notebook while people tell you stuff that may not have occurred to you before?
It's a fair question. So the great thing about the Susie Lamplugh Trust training is it's interactive. And so it takes you through scenarios. And actually, the thing is, Sabrina, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but there are, I'm sure, examples in the past where I've been in a situation, could be at a club or whatever, where a woman was being harassed, and I didn't have the. It's the empathy of realising how is it being received. So what it does, James, it gives you scenarios where it gives you a number of tools you can use to help the person. It could be distraction.
Okay.
Get involved in the interaction. It could be
so if you're on the bus and there was some footage recorded in London just last week.
I could say if Sabrina was if you were chatting up Sabrina on a bus and she was uncomfortable, I could say to Sabrina, I could say, do you know what the next stop is? That's distraction, right?
Okay.
And so the idea is, I'm being an ally.
You don't have to pretend that you're an old friend.
No. So it could be.
Just little simple tactics you can deploy to diffuse and distract and divide.
Absolutely, there's distract. You
can
do stuff. You can document it, like you said, the recording it. You can take direct action against the person causing the behaviour. You can delay, so afterwards make sure Sabrina or somebody else is okay. But I'd encourage your listeners who want to get more involved in this, either go to the City Hall website or contact Susie Lamplugh Trust, who are brilliant, in partnership with Laura, doing some great work, and we're working with lots of other great organisations across our city, because I think when you bear in mind, more than half of our city are women and girls. That means more than half of our city on a daily basis experience unwanted aggressive behaviour. That can't be right.
A lot of criticism we've aired already regarding the ULEZ approach, so some praise here. Speaking as an asthmatic, thank God for Mr. Khan, a rare politician in this day and age, willing to stand firm in the face of unpopularity and do the hard thing for the health of all Londoners, and speaking up for children who need us adults to do the best for them. Sad motorcar drivers, they need to adjust to doing the right thing for us all. It is a hugely divisive issue. You point again, I imagine, to the relative diffusing in the zone, the first zone, the numbers that are released today that suggest that it has not only been successful, but an awful lot of the predictions have come to naught. The predictions of bad impacts have come to naught.
Well, listen, if it was the case it wasn't working, I wouldn't proceed with expanding it. But it is working. And I make this point, James, and it's really important to make this point and make it quite unapologetically. I appreciate there is a vocal minority who are very angry, but I was elected by the silent majority to speak up for them as well. And that includes the 4,000 bereaved families every year whose loved ones die prematurely because of air quality. I've had the privilege, and it's a heartbreaking privilege, to visit the Evelina Children's Hospital. If you ever get a chance, James, and can go to Great Ormond Street Hospital and visit those children and those families who suffer ill health because of the stuff we're breathing in, and it's an invisible killer. And and I'm sure these same conversations were had. Well, I know they were had with tobacco in 2006, 2007, 2008. But also, 60 years ago, we knew tobacco was bad. 60 years ago, we knew tobacco was bad. The Great Smog in the 1950s, and about climate change. Climate change for 30 years, people denied it, and now they want to delay action. Well, I think we've got to be the first generation that takes action on both climate change and air quality.
On a similar theme, or in a similar vein, Alice in Northwich writes, as a retired NHS professional, I'm aware that usually people can't feel irreparable damage being done to their lungs at the time when it is actually happening, often in childhood. Very sadly, finding out only when older that it cannot be cured. Please, could you help people to understand this, or perhaps get a doctor on to explain, as it affects the whole nation and the cost to our NHS, although, of course, up in Northwich, you're not going to be directly affected by this, Alice, but your point stands. Another call, I think.
Well, actually, Alice will be, because if you've got an idling car outside a school, idling car outside the church, you're breathing in the poison. So this is not just a London issue. This is an issue for our entire country and across the globe. Across the globe, millions of premature deaths because of poor quality air. That's one of the reasons why, in the first year of me being the mayor, I implemented the largest number of air quality monitors of any city in the world, so we could monitor in real time how bad the air was. And Ellis knows what's going on because he's a former doctor. But many in his community won't realise on a daily basis they're breathing in poison.
The mayor is using this as a party political broadcast. We know what he plans. That's why we're fighting it. He shows no empathy for those who cannot pay for a new car or ULEZ. He has no words for those whose lives will be heavily impacted by this for many, many reasons, writes Marilyn.
Marilyn, I understand it's hard. That's why we've got this scrappage scheme. We've put aside £171 million. £171 million to support those people to transition from a polluting vehicle to either a cleaner vehicle if they want to still keep a car. We've even now got a scheme where you can get two travel cars for a bus and tram for a year if you want to take that option. We've partnered up with other people to support those who need to make a transition. So actually I'm being criticised also by some for subsidising polluters, but I think it's important to help people like you, Marilyn. But who speaks for those children in the Evelina Children's Hospital? Who speaks for those at Great Ormond Street? Who speaks for those breathing in the stuff, not realising they're breathing in the stuff? Walking to school, think they're doing the right thing, breathing in poison. And it's really important to recognise these same sorts of conversations were being had, Marilyn, when it came to banning smoking in public places, were being had in relation to stopping cigarette companies sponsoring cricket and other sports and so forth.
Not. Listen, you know and I know that nobody needed to smoke to do their job.
Well, if you're a trumpet player like Roy Castle,
yes,
you needed to go to the working men's club to earn a living.
But you're not answering my point.
No, but that was his job.
I know,
his job was to play trumpet.
He got lung cancer through passive smoking. But nobody lost their livelihood as a consequence of the smoking ban.
No, that was the prediction made, though. I was in Parliament. It was a free vote. And if you remember, James, it was a free vote because some people were saying it's the only pleasure working class people have is smoking. You're going to take it away from them. They like smoking with a pint in the pub. If you don't allow them to smoke in a pub, those pubs will close down. It's their livelihoods, right? The same sorts of lobbying done then as well. The same lobbying done, by the way, in 2017, 2019 and 2021. And listen, the skies haven't fallen in. What the evidence published today, shows it's led to cleaner air and people breathing cleaner air in central London. 4 million Londoners benefiting, and in London, what about the other 5 million in outer London?
Okay, let's. I think
let's take another call. And
let's go to Bromley first, if we can. Have you got Tendai and Bromley? I think.
Good morning, Tendai.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, James.
Hello.
My name is Tendai, and I'm going to ask a question really generally about child safety outside schools. I'm not sure if the mayor has seen the video of the incident that happened in Ashford this week regarding...
Yes, he has.
He has. Yeah. So my question is, I've got 2 teenagers, and I've discussed with them and had a conversation about incidents like that. And it seems like it's not an isolated incident. My daughter's school, she's had a couple of fights outside the school with people coming from outside the school, waiting for someone from the school outside the school. Same incident at my son's school. How safe are we as parents? How comfortable are we as parents knowing that our children are safe whilst they come back from school?
Yeah, Tenda, thanks for your question. And I completely understand your concerns as a mum. So it's half term next week. What we have to do, though, as a society is to make sure we are checking with our schools that they have a proper. The jargon is safeguarding, right? That basically means looking after our kids. They've got the proper safeguarding in place within the school and on the outskirts of the school as well, to make sure our children are safe. And you're right, there is a danger from other pupils potentially in relation to fighting and so forth. In that particular case, it appears, and I'll use the word appears, that one black girl and her race is relevant to the story, because when you look at the video, there's a racial element to that. And so we've got to make sure we challenge in a polite, courteous way our schools to make sure they've got proper procedures with staff properly trained, and they are also locating their staff at places to make sure this sort of stuff doesn't happen. Because when you send your child to school, there's a contract, if you like, not a legal contract, but there's a contract you have with the school that they will look after your child whilst he or she is on the school premises. And also, good schools will make sure outside the school they're making sure your child is safe as well. And it's really important that and that's one of the reasons why Janet Davey, the MP, has written to the Home Secretary and the Education Secretary to make sure that from the centre those checks and balances are being done. But I think it's incumbent on all parents and all governors and others to make sure those checks are being done as well.
Let's take one more call and then we're done.
The next call, I think, is from Epping, and it's Andrew. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Sadiq. Nice to speak to you, Lars. I'm not sure if I should say Batman. Anyway, sorry.
Do you remember Only Fools and Horses?
We're short of time.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to say, the reason for my call is a very good friend of mine, very sadly, a few years ago, lost a young nephew, a guy called Tishan Daniel. He was stabbed at a train station on his way to a football match, an Arsenal football match, and it's affected her and her family, as you can imagine, quite terribly. And they're campaigning at the moment for anything that's against knife crime, basically. My question to you is, obviously, what's been happening with the numbers that we saw yesterday, what's been happening in London clearly isn't working. What are you going to do in the future to change that? And also, what are the real numbers in London, in as much as what do we actually hear that we can believe is true as to how bad this epidemic is?
Andrew, thanks for your question and the way you've raised it. And also, just so you know, if you could pass on to the family, Arsenal Football Club are doing some really good work in relation to the issue of knife crime as well, which is really important, and it's a good legacy for him as well. So, look, firstly, I mean, I always, both as the mayor and also as an MP, try and meet bereaved families as much as I can, because it's really important that we show them the respect and also learn from them any ideas they've got. Now, I've been coming on this programme for a number of years now, and I talked some years ago about something called the public health approach when it comes to dealing with knife crime and violent crime. And that means dealing with this as you would a public health issue. And what you would do if there's a public health issue is you deal with the infection. We need to invest in more policing, stop the infection spreading, but also stop the infection occurring in the first place. What we've done from City Hall, Andrew, in the face of massive cuts from 13 years from the central government, is invest in more policing from City Hall, 1,300 more police officers I've announced last week, 500 more police community support officers, tough on crime, but also supporting youth work, youth clubs, after-school clubs, weekend clubs, summer holidays. Why? To give our young people constructive things to do to fulfil their potential rather than being distracted by, gangs and all that sort of stuff. And the good news is, what this investment is showing, being tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, is we are seeing a bucking of the national trend in London. So if you look at last year's figures, 2022, by the way, one homicide is one too many. So I'm not, by any way, want to give the impression of being complacent. But last year we had the fewest homicides in our city in the last 10 years, save for 2014. Teenage homicides went down by more than 55%, but also gun crime, knife crime, youth violence has gone down. We're not complacent, Andrew, because you've got to continue to invest in young people. And we've also recognised from the intelligence we have that the times of day when our children are the most at risk is between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. It's not rocket science. Schools close, and it goes to Tendai's question. The kids are out and about, and so they can be diverted towards stuff that is not safe for them to do. And so we're going to carry on investing in our young people. And this public health approach we stole from Glasgow, Andrew, because Glasgow had huge problems 20 years ago. It took them 10 years to turn it around. We've managed to do it far, far quicker. And I'll make this point in no way bragging, but it's important for us to realise across the country, all these things are still going up. in London, they're going down.
Thank you, Andrew. And that concludes the latest edition of Speak to Sadiq. When's the next one? Do you know?
As soon as we can. But Andrew's left me with the image now of Del Boy and Rodney, Batman and Robin, rather than the
original Caped Crusader.
The better physiqued ones, Andrew.
The dynamic duo. Before you go, do you understand? A lot of people want me to ask you this. Do you understand Keir Starmer's Brexit policy, as in what it is and why he's pursuing it?
I do.
Go on, then.
And I understand it. So look, I think what the National Labour Party is trying to get across is they respect the Brexit result, where 52% voted to leave the European Union. We are outside the European Union, and so what the Labour Party would do, should we have the privilege of being the next government, is to try and negotiate a deal with the European Union, so we can undo some of the bad deal to have a better deal, so we prosper and thrive, rather than, as we're currently doing, having a shrinking GDP and shrinking trade with our biggest trading partner.
So do you think people who are currently very frustrated by Keir Starmer's stance will actually be relieved if he gets into power by some of the policies he pursues?
Oh, look, my view is quite clear.
I know what your view is. What's your view about the question I just asked you?
That Keir Starmer is infinitely better as a prime minister than any of the others from the Tory party. And look, you saw the response Keir Starmer received when he went to Davos recently, where European leaders were there, and they were saying they're hoping, I'm paraphrasing, they're
paraphrasing.
They're hoping that Keir Starmer's the next prime minister because they can do business with Keir Starmer. And it's
paraphrasing.
The reason why it's important is because the European Union is 500 million people. Right? Anybody who does business will tell you, you want to trade with your nearest partner, but also with a big market, and the EU is both.
Sadiq Khan, many thanks. 10:45 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
Join me, Andrew Castle, here on LBC.
If people felt confident that their money was being spent wisely and that the services that their tax money, their hard work and sweat is actually supposed to be going towards, if it's working well, if public services are delivering, then I'm sure people would be more minded to accept the highest tax rates in 70 years. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like the country's working.
Join me, Andrew Castle, tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio